Hello, and welcome back to the Argyle HR Leadership Forum. My name is Brittany Sullivan with Argyle, and it's great to have everyone joining us today. A couple of notes before I turn things over to our esteemed speaker. First, a quick reminder to stop by our sponsors' virtual booths at any time during today's event and for the following week. Our partners are committed to providing you with valuable content and a great overall experience. At any time during today's event, you can visit their virtual booths from the main agenda page, which include complimentary materials, information, and meet and greet opportunities. To ask questions throughout the session, simply type into the Q&A chat, and we will address your questions at the end of the session. Now, without further delay, I would like to introduce our speaker, Rhea Moss, Global Head of Workforce and Customer Insights at ICIMS. We're excited to have Rhea with us for a thought leadership titled Beyond the BLS, Making a Business Case for TA. Welcome, Rhea, and over to you.
Thank you so much for having me. Before we get started too much, just an introduction of myself. My name is Rhea Moss. I am the Global Head of Workforce and Customer Intelligence. As Brittany said, I work for ICIMS. If you're not familiar with ICIMS, we are a talent acquisition software company. I've been at the company about 7 years in roles in product management, engineering, and then now in this current role. And my team leads the data analysis for our research program, which is ICIMS Insights. And I'll tell you a little bit more about the program in general and the data we get to look at. But I thought it'd be fun to join this and share some of our findings with all of you. So that being said, I will start by saying we titled this Beyond the BLS. If we can move on to the next slide, I think that I love this slide, right? I am not an economist. What we look at and what we really focus on from the ICIMS side is talent acquisition data, is looking at, yes, economic data is interesting, but we know it's heavy, it's hard to understand. There's so many nuances of it, right? People spend their whole career studying it. And from the talent acquisition professional standpoint, it can be a lot to really get to what we're trying to explain to our leadership and to our hiring managers and to our candidates. So we will actually start by looking at some economic data because you can't go beyond the BLS without looking at some of the headline numbers. But I put a few key metrics in here. I thought we would kind of try to simplify down and take from a talent acquisition lens, a look at what the BLS is saying the labor market is doing today, and then dive into what we're seeing candidates actually doing and companies actually doing, and really start to disseminate what that means and share that information. So if we go to the next slide, we're just going to go high level. I promise this is not an economic talk. I know it's lunchtime for some people, and I don't want to put you to sleep after you had a big lunch. But I thought I'd pull some just key metrics we're looking at right now. Currently, unemployment, it actually ticked slightly up in the last month. It's at 3.9%. It is the highest it's been since January of 2022, but we're in a record long length of it being incredibly low. Everyone kind of seems to know that number. It's on the headline news right now. I think in general, everybody knows unemployment is down, but some of these other ones are a little more interesting from our standpoint in filling requisitions in talent acquisition. Quit rate is at 2.1%. That's actually the lowest it's been since August of 2020. We are back to what we would consider for quit rate a pre-pandemic level. That being said, I do think it's important to call out the quit rate for the 9 years leading up to the pandemic had been steadily increasing year over year. So we'd seen sort of this shape of the quit rate line go like this. Then we saw the Great Resignation where it obviously spiked immensely. Like I said, it's down to 2.1%, but not necessarily down to where we might have been 10 years ago. And then the last one, which I find really interesting, and this is one that we actually calculate off of the BLS data. It's not something that you're going to hear a bunch of times. You'll hear it in some news articles, but not a big economic metric that's shared a lot. But I think it's fascinating, which is jobs per unemployed worker. So what that means right now, sitting at 1.4, means there are 1.4 open jobs for everyone saying that they're unemployed and looking for one. So I think that's really interesting because you're all probably saying, you would read these and go, okay, it's completely a candidate's market, right? There's more open jobs for unemployed worker. The quit rate is, like I said, is still elevated, but down to where it was pre-pandemic, and unemployment is really low. You would think, based on just the economic data, that it's very, very much a market where all the power sits with candidates right now. And that's where I really like our role, because we say that's not enough. I talk to a lot of recruiters and they say, that's not exactly what it feels like right now, Rhea. I understand that's what the data is showing, but we've got extremes all over the place, and this is really just averages. So this is where we then like to look at the ICIMS platform data to see how that activity really plays out inside our platform. So before I go super data nerding out on all of you, I thought I'd give you just a quick overview of the company. I think it helps you understand the metrics we have and what we look at. So like I said, we are a talent acquisition software company. We've been providing talent acquisition software for over 20 years. We have a large customer base. And I think this is where my job gets really fun, is the data set that I get to look at is quite large. We have 25% of the Fortune 500, 20% of the Global 500. But my happy place is kind of that bottom right data that's popping up here. Give you a sense of scale when we talk analysis, right? BLS is based on survey data. A lot of the metrics you hear are based on survey responses. And while we do have surveys, when we talk hiring, we're not sampling or surveying anything. We're looking at the data set of our collective thousands of customers. Just to give you a sense, when we talk example applications, we had over 200 million applications go through our system last year, which resulted in about 5.5 million hires. So when you think of general hiring, that's a huge amount of hires. It definitely is a large proportion of what we're seeing happen in the market. And it really gives us the opportunity to have that lens of looking into what we're seeing in real time, not lagged, not waiting on survey responses each and every month. So you're probably saying, okay, well, what are we seeing, right, in real time? And by the way, I love interactive conversations. So please put it in the session chat, question, comment. You think it's interesting, you totally disagree. Love to hear it, love to see it, and I'll be keeping an eye on that as well. So we put an insights report out every single month. And every month when we put our insights report out, it always starts with the next slide, which we call the 3-line chart. And really what that is our key metrics as far as, supply and demand of jobs and talent. The first one, that yellow line that you're seeing right there, that is job applicants. Are people coming to career sites, and are they applying and converting to become applicants? That teal bar is openings, right? This is, are companies putting out new openings? Are they posting jobs? How many openings are they putting out to that posting, right? Are they trying to put sort of that external signal out to job seekers, to the market, that they're looking to hire? And then that last one is that navy line, which is, hires. So did they open the job? Did they find the right candidate? And were they, which is a very recent conversation we're having, were they willing to make that offer even when they had the right opening, find the right candidate, the right fit? Did they make the offer, and was that offer accepted to be a hire? So what we're seeing right now, despite last month being a short month, I know we had one extra day for leap day, but it's still a shorter month. We always expect to see these declines from January to February, is that we saw that both employers and candidates were pretty busy in February, but hires and job openings were held pretty steady compared to applications, which actually declined 11% month over month. That being said, it is still elevated. This chart is anchored on the beginning of 2023. So those numbers on the right-hand side, 2% more job applications now than the beginning of 2023, to about 10% less job openings and 5% less hires. A really interesting call out there, because what we're seeing is that, we did know unemployment rose a little bit, so we would maybe expect to see a little bit more job applicants. We didn't see that right now. But we are seeing, with that hires bar kind of holding flat month over month, that maybe those New Year's resolution, early January applications did actually end up being hires. So then I always get asked the question, okay, great. Well, what did that mean on time to fill, right? Isn't time to fill always, it's what are we doing and how fast are we doing it, right? They're two sides of the same coin. And what I think is really fascinating about time to fill right now, I always say to my team, the interesting thing about time to fill is it's uninteresting. What we're seeing right now is that large influx of candidates that we saw, it did not increase time to fill. It didn't even overly decrease time to fill. It really didn't have much of an effect. And now we're starting to ask that question, okay, if more candidates and less jobs and all these changes that we just saw on that last slide don't change time to fill, what will? To give you a sense, time to fill has hovered steadily at about 6 weeks, give or take a few days either way. We see things like holidays, we'll add a couple days here and there. But really, we're seeing sort of speed still be paramount. And we're seeing right now that recruiting teams are in general smaller than they were in the past couple of years. So what we're asking is this question of, if we have, more applicants to less jobs and smaller recruiting teams, what's affecting time to fill? And is it more that recruiters are just being asked to be creative, to be scrappy, to use technology? We'll get into that in a little bit, to figure out a way to still fill these roles, because gone are the days that employers are maybe necessarily saying, that's fine if it takes longer to find the right candidate, we'll wait, right? But I will say one thing that we find interesting as well is just this notion of what does that mean on the candidate experience? So I like to think of it kind of as a flow chart of valves, right? If you live in a house with water pressure problems like I do, as soon as you have the dishwasher running and a shower running, and then someone starts the second shower, right? All your water pressure goes down. And this is what I think of when we think of hiring, right? We can't have it all. So we always talk about kind of like, what are those dials we can turn to keep up in this ever-changing market, right? I can't even believe we're talking about 21, we talked about help me find recruiters. I can't hire recruiters. And then it was find any talent we can. It was kind of the days of just find a candidate with a heartbeat that'll take the job, especially in certain spaces like low wage labor or retail. And now we're sort of seeing a shift. So I like to say when we're working with our organization, our CEO, something's got to give, right? So I always say the first one that I say is quality of hire, right? I don't know a business out there right now that's saying, I understand you have a smaller recruiting team and a smaller budget. Just don't hire as good of a candidate. I mean, drop in the chat if your CEO has said that. I doubt we're going to have any responses here, but I usually get a lot of head nods in the room to say, yeah, that's absolutely not going to happen, not okay. So then the next piece is, okay, so time to fill, right? Speed. Maybe we say, look, if we can't spend more, if we can't have more headcount to help hire, well, then it's just going to take us longer. Again, we just saw on that time to fill chart, that's not the case that's necessarily happening. We're still being expected to fill those roles in the same rate, if not faster than normal. Then the third one is cost. And I will say, if I showed this slide this time last year, half of you might have said, that's okay. I've got some budget. I can invest in tools. I can spend more on job advertising. I've got some budget, right? In general, what I'm hearing from our customer base is that budget a lot has dried up. Save certain spaces. If you're in the healthcare space, you may be saying, yes, I'm still able to spend. But in certain spaces, we're seeing really slow down almost to the point of zero. So then the only thing left to give, I always say, if you're talking to your CEO and you say, I can't hire less quality candidates, I can't hire any slower, and you won't let me spend money, then really the only thing that you can give up on or sort of let slide by the wayside is candidate experience. And I think that's a little bit of a scary point where a lot of times we see executives say, okay, if we have to have less of a great candidate experience for, again, remember, we have more candidates. So not just the candidates are coming in, more candidates that we had coming in last year, having sort of this subpar candidate experience. That's what I'm seeing right now, companies kind of giving up on, like letting that dial not have the water pressure that it deserves. But this is where I think it's really important. And I know we called this talk kind of making a business case for talent acquisition. This is where I think we really need to get leaders in our business to see how critical that candidate experience valve is and really should be. Working with CFOs and CEOs, this next slide is one of my favorites. Every time I present it, I see people immediately pull their phones out. I see people writing this number down as fast as they can, saying, this is what I need to share with my leadership or my partners throughout the business. 56% of people, I love this stat, 56% of people said that they would be less likely to be a consumer of a brand if they've had a bad experience applying or interviewing for a job. I think that's a really, really powerful number. We talk a lot about how our consumers are our candidates and our candidates are our consumers. And I think it's really easy to kind of quick take on this and go, well, not in my business. That's not how my business runs. I'll give you an example of a customer I spoke to recently. Well, we're a healthcare company. That's not necessarily the case. Or we're a software company. We're B2B. So, the B2C doesn't matter. And I say, I completely understand if you're a software company that's B2B, but here's what happens. That candidate applied. They probably already liked your brand, and that's why they were willing to apply. Maybe they've used you before, and they believe in your solution or your software. Yes, they have a poor candidate experience. Almost 60% of those candidates are saying that when they get to their next job and they're picking a solution or a piece of software, or in the healthcare space, when it comes to find their primary care physician, the next time there's a choice of two different providers and one is in network of a company that they had a poor experience applying for, that we know now, and they're telling us outright that they will be less likely to choose you in the future. And I think this is where we can really get our CFO to buy in and our CEO to buy in to say, okay, I get it. You might not be hiring right now. Talent acquisition may not be the business priority, but I was just speaking with a customer in a call right before this, and they said, I had 1.2 million applicants last year. And I said, well, are you willing to tell your CFO that, 6 or 700,000 of them are now less likely to be consumers of your brand next year. I don't know any chief marketing officer or any CFO that says, I'm willing to give up that kind of potential consumer into the bottom line of my business. So I think that's where we need to change the conversation about. This isn't about just pulling in top talent in the talent acquisition space. It's really a part of your brand, and it has a direct impact on the events and behaviors that those candidates will then do as a consumer in the future. I think the next slide is interesting too. We've really shifted, if you think about it, as a society. And I talk a lot about, we talk talent acquisition, we want to talk talent acquisition data, but this really is, what are people thinking? What is their psychology? How is society shifting? And how does that have an effect on how they look for jobs? We live in, I will call it the Yelp society, right? That is the world we're living in now. I think this is fascinating. 14% of people said they will post a review on Glassdoor after a bad experience applying for the job. I think that is wild. These people don't even talk to you necessarily. They didn't even get to an interview stage. They have just applied for the job. And if they felt that their application process wasn't as smooth as they would like it to be, they will go on Glassdoor and they will blast your business. 18%, which of course we see that go up, said the same if they had a bad experience while interviewing for a job. That to me felt a little more normal. 1 in 5 of your candidates have a bad experience interviewing for a job. They're going to go put that on Glassdoor. I think that was the intention of Glassdoor when it was made, not necessarily I had a clunky career site. I had my resume parsing didn't work, right? A lot of the complaints you hear about applying for jobs, it wasn't mobile friendly and I was on my phone. I think that's a little bit more surprising that that's all it takes anymore for someone to go write a negative review. But again, like I said, 18%, if they're in the interview process, have a poor experience, they're going to go put that information out on a site like Glassdoor. But here's where we should be concerned. 36% of people said that if an employer has reviews on Glassdoor, they think of that as the most accurate source of information for what it's like to work at your organization. So when we think about branding and we think about our EVPs, it's kind of crazy to think no matter how much work we do on a beautiful career site and selling DEI in our culture, that more than a third of your candidates don't believe that's the most accurate place to go get information about working at your company. It's actually on Glassdoor. And then what I also think is interesting, we want to talk about, why it's important. We're talking about, all of us are kind of hoping we're on the precipice of the end of this sort of economic wait and see that a lot of companies have been in and we've been in as a nation as a whole. There's a lot of job seeker confidence where there may not be so much company confidence. And one of these stats that we just found in our last report says that half of your employees might be looking for a new job. 51% of the people that responded to our survey said they're at least considering looking for a new job this year. So while we just celebrated, this is where I say BLS data versus talent acquisition data, we just celebrated that quit rate is back to the pre-pandemic level. We actually know, though, that just because they aren't quitting yet, they're thinking about it. They're telling us they're thinking about it. And then we ask them, okay, that's a little bit of a negative thing to know about, but I always ask our chief people officer, have you thought about the fact that we might lose half the business next year if we don't treat our employees right, if we don't have good internal mobility? So we ask the question, okay, why? If you're going to leave, why are you thinking about leaving? I think no surprise, half of people responded salary. Benefits came up next. Location is very fascinating. I love if you look at that bottom left-hand corner, it's interesting to see salaries become important because of wage transparency, right? 35% of people now saying they won't even apply if the salary is not included in the job listing. I always like to add an accurate salary. Can we please stop the $100,000 to $300,000 as a salary range, right? And then I think it's really interesting when we talk about, DEI and growth of internal growth. 7% said lack of opportunities internally. 6% said concerns about economy in the future. I think that's very fascinating because historically, if you think about it, as we as society are concerned about a recession or an economic downturn, it used to be the safest thing to do was to stay in the job you're in. But we know that at least 6% of our workforce actually thinks that's a reason to go find a new job. Talk about a psychology shift in candidates, right? And then the last piece is DEI, right? 44% of people said that they would consider looking for a new job if the employer does not demonstrate the commitment to promoting DEI. Not a lot we can do from a TA perspective to keep the current employees there, That is a culture piece. But I think as TA, this is where we can help affect culture to say, here's who we have at risk because our culture is not really living up to the EVP we sold when we brought them in the organization. This next one is really interesting. I know we're on the topic of internal and external candidates and internal mobility. I think internal mobility is going to be one of the hottest buzzwords we see at all of the conferences this year. Skills-based hiring was really big last year, if you remember. I think it's still there, but internal mobility is going to be really key. So what we're looking at with this research and this data is that on the left-hand side, you have job applications. From January of 23 to this last month, internal apps are actually up 7%, while external applications are up 2%. And what's really interesting, so that's kind of what the candidates are seeing. So we're back to them seeing opportunity to grow inside their company. That's really good news for employers because we did not necessarily see that last year in the data. We saw candidates going straight external first. This is a nice sigh of relief. It's good news. But that's where, again, we need to think really, really long and hard about rolling out the red carpet internally. A lot of times you have companies where their external career site is beautiful and it has AI and it job matches and the communication with candidates is amazing. And then you say, what's your candidate experience like for your current employees? And they're like, oh, we just have like a portal with a list of jobs, right? How often do we see that happen? Or, we'll get back to them when we get back to them. Maybe they wait a week, maybe they wait a month to even hear a response on it. What is really interesting now is that hires on the right-hand side. So we actually see that hires are up 4% for internal hires, right? This is companies doing a great job of finding the skills inside their own organization and not necessarily having to go outside. But the external hires are down 6%. I think that speaks to sort of this question mark and wait and see that we're seeing so many different companies kind of say, we're starting to open positions again, but it's not that same, green light to make the offer that it used to be, right? We're starting to build up the talent pools. It feels like we're in this kind of edge of we're waiting to just get that green light go and hit the ground running. And so we're trying to be ready for it, but we're not seeing companies necessarily quite doing that today. So I want to leave a couple minutes for questions. I'm going to go through the next couple slides really quickly, but I like to call this kind of today's talent acquisition equation. And it's a little bit of a negative slide, but I promise we'll end on a high note. But where is talent acquisition today? So we're seeing reduced HR teams, right? I'm hearing that all over the place, right? Less recruiters. I don't have as many recruiters as I had. I'm losing recruiters and I don't get backfill. We know our research shows, recruiters were the decline in hiring. When you look at different roles, recruiters saw one of the steepest declines of hiring in the last year. But then we talked about this, but wait, we have an influx of applications. So those two are an interesting side by side happening, right? We have less recruiters and we have more applicants. So then what happens? Obviously, the recruiters we have are overwhelmed. We're hearing things like, recs per recruiter in the hundreds, high hundreds at this point in certain companies and certain spaces. But they're getting so many applicants, they can't get through them, which ends up in a bad candidate experience. We know that, right? And then what does that eventually lead to, as we talked about with our research, which is that reduced bottom line, which is there is an effect right now on our corporate bottom line, not just because of the people inside our business. And we know that people drive business and people drive profit, but as consumers, that we're losing so much from the consumer side when there's this poor candidate experience. So then I guess the final question I'll leave you with, and I'm going to leave a few minutes for questions. So please throw them in the chat if you have any. So everyone says, okay, so what can I do? What's the answer right now? And I can't change the faucets. We have our answers that we have from our leadership. And how can we have a quality candidate experience? So in my mind, I really think it's threefold. The first is tools. I know it's in the middle here, but how do we have tools and technologies? And I know I'm almost complete through a whole talk and didn't use the buzzword AI. I almost want to pat myself on the back for it. But how do we make the people we have more efficient? How do we make the interactions we have still feel personalized, but done at scale and done quickly, with using technology to help us provide that candidate experience and have people feel that they get that one-on-one human touch without it having to be done because we don't have the people there to do it right now. And then the second one I will say, is people. And I don't mean just recruiters, but I think candidates. So often right now, companies are setting their strategy based on what the company needs. I don't think we're doing enough listening to the candidates. I don't think we're listening to them. How do they want to be interacted with? How often do they want to be interacted with? Do they prefer phone calls? Is it a text message, right? Meeting that candidate where they are. I always say we live in a society where I can track my Domino's pizza all the way from when I put my credit card in. I know when they're putting the toppings on. I know when it's gone in the oven. I'm watching the driver drive to my house because, yes, I'm that person. That is what we as a society have gotten used to, right? We are the new, 2-day Prime Amazon people that now have gone to, oh, it's not available tomorrow, and in some markets in a couple hours, right? So I think we really have to listen to our candidates and say, what do you want? And how can we have, within the confines of what we're given, how can we give you what you want as candidates? And then the last piece is data. I know I told you I'm the quintessential ICIMS data nerd, but I do think it's really important to be watching the data, because if you look at the last few years, the rate of change, of we're hiring like crazy, we're not hiring at all, we're hiring like crazy, we're not hiring at all. Really looking at those forward-facing indicators to keep an eye on the market to say, how can we know when it's going to change? When does that green light go? How can I be ahead of my competition? Because I don't want to, be 10 steps ahead. They started opening the recs because they're growing, and now we're behind. And those candidates that we're starting to touch out are already getting offers from the business across the street. So I will say, I'm happy. I thank ICIMS for giving me the role that I give, because we make our information public for all of you. So on the next slide here, I actually included 2 links that I think hopefully you guys can take away, follow along. One, I'd love to connect with you all on LinkedIn. I do a monthly video. I need to post it when I hang up from this call. So there'll be a brand new one going up today that just outlines what we're seeing in the labor market from a digestible talent acquisition standpoint. And then the second link is ICIMS Insights public facing website, our section of the ICIMS website, which is every month we put a full research report up of what we're finding, with really helpful, I love this. Someone said the other day, there's data and then there's insights. So you'll get the graphs, you'll get the charts, but there's also kind of our take and then what we can do about it and what we're seeing looking forward. So with that, I will head over. I see some questions coming in here. I love Vicky Lynn is asking, can we make any predictions for what the future of hiring will look like, especially as the way of working continues to evolve? Honest answer, I can't even make predictions on anything anymore. If the last 3 years have taught us anything, it's that, even economists, it's every month when you watch the jobs report, it's like economists were surprised again. I think all we can do is watch some of those forward leading indicators. I think I love companies that are doing things like NPS scores for their candidates to really get that sense of what they're looking for so that they can get ahead. But I always say, look at things like the offer acceptance rates. And as we see those start to shift again, then we'll know that we're seeing kind of the power go back to the candidate, and really watching like applicants per opening, or we call it talent supply and demand, that we report on, because when we see that shift, we'll then start to see those human behaviors shift after them, sort of that job seeker confidence and, who has the upper hand in the negotiation change. What do you think is the number one hiring mistake that employers are making, and how can we overcome it? I mean, I think if I just go really basic, ghosting. I hear all the time from both sides. It's not just y'all, right? It is both sides. Communication. I think there's a huge break in communication and how people want to communicate. We hear companies say, well, they didn't even respond to my offer, but they sent it via an email, and it's a candidate that had never emailed with them. So I think meeting candidates where they want to communicate is really huge. Text is really big, making sure that you're able to audit, report on it, using a tool, not a personal cell phone to do it, but things like texting, things like updating candidates. And I'll be honest, I still think we have a long, long way to go with how we treat internal candidates, like I said, and really give them a white glove experience, because they're going to apply for a job at our company. And if they don't get it, they will go apply somewhere else, and they're going to get that experience there. There's a question on how we can leverage the revealed analytics and data to attract, but also retain great teams in the current job market. I completely agree there. I think where I see talent acquisition teams really thriving this year and is when they're partnering with HR from a bigger perspective, right? If talent acquisition is only looking at bringing in new talent and not at retaining and growing current talent, if every time you get a new rec, you're immediately starting by posting it externally and sending it to external sourcers, I think we're making a really big mistake. I think where I see companies thriving right now, like I said, is just that partnership where they're not just partnering with current HR, right? How do you plan for what you plan to hire next year, and then start to look at what you have in your business, right? You still have their resume. You still know the information about this How do we make that internal employee ready for the next role when it's planned? And then also partner with marketing. A lot of companies I'm seeing are partnering really closely with social media teams, brand marketing teams, to give that seamless feel of there not being a difference between the candidate and the consumer experience. I'm at time. I know, Brittany, I told you I would hand it back over to you. Thank you all for the questions. If there's more questions, please reach out, send them to me on LinkedIn. I love to chat with all of you, and thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rhea, for such an insightful thought leadership. I also wanted to take the time to thank everyone else for joining us today. This session, along with all of today's content, will be made available on demand following the event. And shortly at 1:50 Eastern, which will be a panel titled Harnessing Hyper-Personalization to Improve Employee Experiences. Please click on the join button that will appear to be redirected to the next session, and we look forward to seeing you there. Thank you again, Rhea.
Thank you so much.